Hello, everyone, and welcome back. We are just about to launch into our competency-based education session, which I'm very excited about. So far, I think it's been a great day of sharing, and I hope that it continues through the subsequent sessions. I wanted to just mention that if there are questions as they come up, as you think of them, please just enter them into the Q&A box, and then I'll be able to line those up, and we'll address them as soon as our speaker ends. So I wanted to introduce our speaker, who is Dr. Robin Berenson. Dr. Berenson serves as the Director of Academic Innovation for the Enterprise and Curriculum Services team here at McGraw-Hill. So she's responsible for supporting, coordinating, and cultivating creative and innovative approaches to teaching, learning, curriculum, and program development in higher education. She's a thought leader in education, and Robin works collaboratively with internal and external stakeholders to create a myriad of approaches that will facilitate student success and learning and support the MHE enterprise sales efforts. So she joined McGraw-Hill in 2016, so just this year, and although new to McGraw-Hill, she's been involved in alternative and innovative approaches in higher education for the past 16 years. So Robin held executive leadership positions in healthcare and human resources before she began her career in higher education, linking her theory to practical expertise. So prior to joining McGraw-Hill, she worked as the Associate Dean for Business at Excelsior College and led the development of competency-based education there, as well as being involved in OER implementation task force, a gamification task force, redesign of the MBA, and competency-based education network. So she served as Dean, Associate Dean, Program Chair, Professor, Instructional Designer, Adjunct, and Instructor for various online and traditional institutions, and mentoring for OLC. She's presented and published on topics including competency-based education, faculty development and mentoring, student success, teams, and leadership. So really the exact kind of background that we were hoping to have leading the competency-based education efforts here. So we're very excited to have Robin as part of the team, and really excited for this talk and sharing her experience in competency-based education. So without further ado, I will pass things over to Dr. Robin Berenson.
Thank you, Alex, for the kind words. And I'm going to talk about competency-based education, and it's very appropriate today. I'm actually at the Competency-Based Exchange Conference in Phoenix and getting the up-to-date information about what's going on in CBE. So I'm going to also include some of that as I'm speaking today. Initially, I'm going to give you an overview of what's going on and how competency-based education emerged very quickly, and then some practical tips on how to integrate competency-based education. So what's going on today? The educational landscape is really shifting. There's a paradigm shift, but what's causing it? Let me just move my slides as I'm going here, so that you all can see. Learning is becoming more measurable. If we think about it, in years past, we didn't have a lot of data. We had pen and pencil tests, and we had data from individuals, but now we have the ability to measure learning. The cost and affordability of higher ed is of concern. Innovation, no matter what we want to say, whether we're in an election year or not in an election year, is here to stay. How it looks will be dependent on how we all work together. Technology tools have really come about, new teaching techniques have come about, analytics enable data-driven decisions, and there's an ecosystem of digital concept. We've moved from a individual type learning environment to more of a personalized learning that really translates into workforce readiness. And when I think about CBE, and CBE to me, it's really the connection between student success in the classroom and workforce readiness. And that's how I'm going to focus today on what I'm talking about. So what is the value proposition, whether it's CBE or whether it's another type of modality or pathway is really to improve learning outcomes that matter and decrease the cost per learner. So when we think about CBE, there's several different starting points. But why CBE? The reasons for institutions going to CBE are varied. It's whether we need an alternate way of today's higher education to breaking the iron cost of cost, access, and quality. Is it because of the students, the employer, the policy demands? Are we looking at it because we want to increase graduate preparedness, meet the future workforce needs, or offer more of a personalized learning approach? So if we think about CBE, what does CBE really address and where has it emerged? It emerged back in the 60s and 70s. And in the 60s and 70s, we saw it in very similar light that we see it today. And from a historical context, Parnell in 1978 commented that there are two major components necessary to operate competency-based education. First, the definition is what is to be learned, and second, the development of performance indicators determine what learning has taken place. At that point, they were using paper and pencil tests, and what Parnell was saying at that point was paper and pencil test or objective type tests may or may not be measuring what students can do. It may measure knowledge, but is it really measuring what they can do? So in 1978, he was saying that the development of performance indicators are in the embryonic stage. Well, if we fast forward this to today, now we have technology and data and analytics that have really changed this ecosystem. And we're expanding not only the cognitive knowledge, but how do you apply that knowledge and how is it relevant to the workplace today? So what does CBE really address? When you're really thinking about it, it does address costs and access, but it really addresses learning. Can the individual or the student demonstrate that they can apply and do rather than just recite? So it's changing the dynamic of what it's actually saying, and it's focusing us on really developing and defining a new way and rethinking and revisiting and reshaping how we build teaching and learning using not only technology but innovative approaches. When we think about CBE, what's changed from the 1970s to today is that a group of individuals have gotten together, institutions, vendors, and policy makers, and really helped define what CBE is. The Competency Based Education Network, which I was a part of for over 2 years, and worked on helping with a common definition of CBE. But what CBEN actually tried to do is define it in a broad-based context so that CBE is more of an approach or a pathway where some people think CBE is a program. And CBE is more of an approach to curricular design that's intentional and transparent. It has an academic model in mind, and it takes to demonstrate competencies, what competency means to one institution and what model means to one institution varies. But the one thing that's held constant are expectations about learning. Students have to acquire and demonstrate their knowledge and skills by engaging in learning exercises, activities, experiences that align with clearly defined programmatic outcomes. Students receive proactive guidance and support from faculty and staff. One of the aspects of CBE is that faculty are still involved. It's not just a self-paced, there's some sort of involvement of that substantive interaction. And the learners earn credentials by demonstrating mastery. And mastery will be dependent and defined differently by institutions. So the focus is on assessment, the focus is on good curriculum design, and the focus is on assessment. And sometimes this is at a personalized pace, and a personalized pace can mean different things to different folks. You may ask about the accreditors, and what does accreditation say about CBE? And the Council of Regional Accrediting Commissions, CRAC, position on CBE says that competency-based education is an outcome-based approach to earning a college degree or other credential. Competencies are statements. Students progress through the degree or credential programs by demonstrating competency specific at the course and or program level. The curriculum is structured, and there's attainment or mastery of the competencies. Because competencies are often anchored in different expectations from external forces to non-external forces such as employers, students must pass the competency in what we're defining as the level considered to be good or excellent. And that level of good and excellent is defined by the institution. So if we think about a competency and we think about it from the cognitive skills to the applied skills, it's what does a student know at the lowest level to what does a student do at the highest level to be competent. So how do we design a pathway to competency-based education? One of the things that you need to take into account is the culture and the mission and vision of the organization. And from my experience in developing a competency-based program, one of the things that we learn is that you have to get the right stakeholders involved, and you have to really link this back to the institutional mission and vision. And CBEN has done what they call a project life cycle. And one of the things is looking at where are the touch points that you need to consider from the student perspective to the faculty perspective to the institutional perspective, and take all of these things into account as you're developing your program. So it's not only the curriculum in the program, but who are the stakeholders involved. So when we think about some design principles, we really want to talk about what does quality look like and how is quality measured within CBE. And some of the areas, Johnstone and Soares actually developed some design principles that are good basic principles, that the degree reflects robust and valid competencies, the students are able to learn at a variable pace, their effective learning resources are available at any time, the assessments are secure and reliable, and I added to it, there must be a balance between time assessment and demonstrated learning. So how do we take what we currently have and we ensure that we scaffold specific competencies such as communication and critical thinking and some of what we're calling general ed competencies throughout the program and not just in a course. So as we're designing this, we need to really think about the overall program and where are the points of competencies and where are you going to measure them? Are you going to measure them incrementally, or are you going to measure them at the end? So where are the formative and summative assessments? And how are we looking at this in regard to authentic assessments? There are different areas as you're creating this to really consider. Most of us cannot blow up our existing structures and do something like College for America, where they were able to just start from scratch, or Western Governors University, where they were able to start from scratch. So how do we break this up into our existing structures, and what areas do we really need to consider? And the first point, as I made before, is really looking at your institutional vision and mission and looking at the strategy and planning and how you're going to do this and where does this correlate with your institutional effectiveness, with your advising, with your financial aid and other elements. How then are you going to look at your curriculum and course development? And are there processes that you currently use that you already have a roadmap for? And can you take those processes and really integrate them with competency-based education and the approach that you want to take? And how is it going to differ and how is it going to be the same? How are you going to deliver this program? Are you going to do it traditionally? Are you going to do it online? Is it going to be blended? Is it going to be in a FlexPath type program or other programs? What is the student experience? And that's the center of this, is what is the student going to experience and what are you going to have to change or not change in your faculty experience? And what are those expectations? Because faculty are going to play a key role in this. And then how are you going to bridge the gap between your employer and your workforce? What are the key questions that you need to ask? And are you going to involve advisory committees or are you going to expand it to professional organizations? When I was developing our competency-based program when I was at Excelsior, one of the things that we did was we went out to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and we looked to them, it was a business program, to validate some of the competencies and help us with that. We also included our industry and advisory board, and we included others in the key disciplinary areas that we developed another advisory board of individuals in the workforce so that we were trying to ensure that our students were workforce ready. So if you look at CBE, as I was saying, you have to look at it in your own continuum and the different touch points that we typically would take into account when we're developing a program. So curriculum, the difference is, are you going to look at industry validated competencies? Are you going to look at curricular design? Are you going to look at co-requisite remediation? Meaning that, are you going to include competencies for math in, for example, accounting? Are you going to include communication competencies throughout your entire program? What happens if the student is deficient in those areas? What type of remediation are you going to have within the existing, if you're doing it within a course or within the existing competency goal? What it really boils down to is, what does this curriculum look like? Is it workforce relevant? Is it instructionally aligned? Do you have the well-defined competency statements? Do you have high quality assessment? And how are you going to include co-requisite remediation to the core competencies? Are you going to do this through technology? Are you going to do it through adaptive learning? Are you going to do it in some other way? When you think about advising, many institutions have gone through a different advising model where the advisors become more like coaches. And so are they coaching to pathway completion? If we think about retention models, are you going to develop a pathway where a student can either stack credentials or they can build upon credentials? What type of predictive analytics are you going to use either prior to the program entry or after the program entry or even during it? And what type of student services and retention are you going to use? What will you really need? What type of technology you're going to use? How are you going to train your faculty and what role are they going to play? How are you going to involve your industry? And the big key is, how are you going to really look at assessment? Because if we don't have good assessment, then it's very hard to report out on the outcomes of the student programs. As I said, the faculty role is very, very important. And faculty are essential in the development. And we think of this as from the administration or the administrator role, but if we don't involve the faculty from the get-go, it can really change the dynamics. And many schools have failed because they don't take into consideration that role and define that role. So faculties can be part of the change agent. They can be the thought leader, the entrepreneur. They can create innovative teaching methods. They can be part of the curriculum. They can be part of the programmatic offering, and really looking at how that takes into account. Before I talk about obstacles, I really want to talk about quality standards. And being at CBE Exchange, it was announced this morning that on the CBEN website, CBE Network, they will have new quality standards that have standard statements, but also will have bulleted points to help you understand what the standards mean, and they're looking for feedback. So why do you need standards for quality? As the government has talked about, is sometimes there are bad actors in this space, and we really want this space to continue with competency-based education. So quality standards provide us with a safe space for innovation and experimentation, and it's really a recipe for responsible innovation. It also provides us with the research to how do we measure student outcomes. And this brings me to talk about obstacles as a stepping stone, and really the choice is ours. We have a regulatory environment, but one of the things that has really changed within the CBE environment is the coming together of the policymakers, of vendors, of employers, of institutions, really to help define the regulatory environment. And speaking from the same page has really moved this forward and given some traction. And I think it will continue no matter where, if there are changes within the government in the upcoming year. We really have to look at what is the value of good teaching, and that's been a diminished value. So good teaching really comes with good curriculum design and good assessment, and also good faculty training. There's always going to be resistance to anything that you do, so including the faculty up front is a good way of handling this. Clearly defining good teaching and learning, and that's what's starting to come about, because we're focusing on the redefinition of learning and rebuilding teaching and learning using the technology, and understanding that the technology is a tool and helps us provide some of the roadmap and some of the analytics, and really looking at our own existing infrastructure. And there's been great strides in the infrastructure, and really looking at the interoperability of CBE type programs with not only content but with academic transcripts as well. So it's looking at how do we create a student journey where a student feels like it's a seamless approach through that journey. And it's really focused on the pedagogy, the assessment, the outcomes, and how we weave everything together as building blocks. And if we think about it as a building block approach, one of the things that I like to think about with building blocks or pillars is whatever approach that we're going to be used, there's going to be some frustration along the way, but it's really shaping the learning and shaping the pathways. So how do we transition this to more of a flexible type model that's not a cookie cutter approach? And I think what's going on in the CBE world right now is that there's boundaries, but it allows institutions to create their own model, whether it's a full-blown CBE program, whether it's a program that is within a course-based structure and you're doing it on a small scale, whether it's a flexible type program, whether it's direct assessment or not. And I think everybody's trying to play in the same arena. to help this happen. And if we think about education as a passport to the future, Malcolm X said, tomorrow belongs to those who prepare for it. And as schools think about CBE, it's really thinking about the connection between the partnerships that are built between industries, educational institutions, vendors, and they'll help begin the broader pathways to jobs and careers. If we think about career readiness, students are striving to meet the demands of the 21st century, and they're increasingly expected to master employability skills. So how do we incorporate this within our traditional academic skills? And it comes down to 4 central things: goals and expectations, outcomes and measures, pathways and supports, and resources and structures. CBE is one approach in order to get there. So having clear value statements, clearly understanding and describing your program, telling your story on CBE, and making sense of the results will help CBE move forward. AIR came out with a report, the American Institutes of Research, and the report suggests that CBE programs center around 2 guiding principles. The requirements to earn credentials are communicated as measurable learning outcomes and general competencies, and the learning is demonstrated through assessments of what students know, understand, and can do. To me, as I continue to reiterate, what this boils down to is well-defined competency statements that are linked with high-quality assessments incorporating co-requisite remediation or adaptation, and fundamentally, it's good curriculum design that links the curriculum with the workplace relevance. And I'm going to stop now with a few questions. And I'm going to start you off with a couple of questions. What intrigues you or excites you about CBE? What concerns you about CBE? What resources would be useful to you in furthering your learning about CBE? And what's your next step? And there was a question here in the group chat: with the different requirements for each region in the terms of competencies, how can we standardize across the country and on the global market? And Joseph, that's a really good question, and it's something that's being talked about right now. Is there are certain competencies being standardized by professional organization, and NACE came up with a career readiness competencies and linked the competencies focusing on employability. And that's one of the areas to start with. And those competencies are critical thinking and problem solving, oral and written communication, teamwork and collaboration, information technology, leadership, professional work ethic, and career management. And all these are connected together. It's institutions working with some of the professional organizations, some of the employers, the accrediting bodies, the Competency-Based Education Network or other networks, and really trying to standardize it. The question with standardization is, how do we keep these broad enough that they're able to be adaptable to each of the institutions?
So just while some people are inputting some additional questions in there, please feel free to continue to add to the chat box. Robin, I had a question as well. You know, trying to tackle transitioning to a competency-based education approach seems incredibly daunting for anyone here that's at that very early stage of just exploration. What would be a good first step for them to take?
Thanks, Alex. I think some of the first step is actually talking to other institutions that are very similar to them and really discovering whether or not this really fits within your institutional mission and what your strategy is. And So CBEN has actually provided many of the institutions, and there's a lot of resources out there. So it's really looking at what other institutions have done and not trying to reinvent the wheel, but also not trying to look like somebody else at the same time, because there are some best practices that are already being developed. So I would look to others to kind of discover, but the first step is really to understand your own culture and your institutional mission and vision.
So out of curiosity, how have you supported other schools that are looking at implementing CBA? What work have you done either in your time with CBEN or in your current role, which could help people on this path?
Thanks, Alex. One of the things that I've done in the past is actually been a mentor to other institutions when it comes to developing their program or curriculum. And speaking about different models, and also writing about, I've written in several journals about just some basic elements to look at, to integrate in your program. When I was at Excelsior, I developed a model that looked at, it was foundation, practice, application. And what I tried to emphasize was really looking at, how do you know what students know at the time? How can we provide opportunities for practice? And then how do we have them apply through authentic assessments? And so I've worked with institutions on authentic assessments, and also talked with them through some of their institutional issues and some areas in change management to really consider. I've developed what I call a strategy map, and really looking at the key stakeholders, the questions to be asked, what are some of the actions, the implementations that you want to take, and then how are you going to evaluate it? Because one of the things that what I found with many of the institutions is that they forget about the evaluation piece. Oh, I'm going to do that. It falls off the face of the earth, and they forget to evaluate what are the lessons learned. So working with some of the institutions on some of the discovery phase is a big part of what I've been working with McGraw-Hill and prior to this.
Perfect. If there are no additional questions just now, I want to thank Robin hugely for a really great talk. I think what was particularly compelling for me is just getting some of the background, and then also some of the very up-to-date research as early as today that Robin's been able to share. For anyone that's curious about how McGraw-Hill could support a transition to CBE, please don't hesitate to reach out. Robin is a fantastic resource to help as a mentor, and also connect in ways that our platforms and services could help support you in trying to accomplish your goals here. But as I said, I want to say a huge thank you to Dr. Robin Berenson. Thank you for taking the time to speak with us today. And we have a session that begins in 25 minutes around a very important topic of improving competency in math by placing effectively. So I look forward to seeing a number of you there. Again, thank you very much, Robin.
Thank you. Thanks, Alex.